Hey, you made it. Thanks for being here. Look, guys, here's the thing. This one's not going to be easy, and I'm sure you know why. All over the internet, and every nerd like me with an under-budget YouTube channel is talking about this dang movie and all of the problems that have come with it. And no, I don't just mean Ezra Miller, who I promise we are going to get to. No, this movie, whether you loved it or hated it for any reason, whether it be for its actual quality or the controversies that continue to be revived by this movie simply existing. People are divided, and perhaps with good reason. This movie, unfortunately not alone, is another reason why people are questioning the entertainment industry as a whole. It has become one of dozens of movies that have been suffering from studio infighting and the escapades of the actors involved. One of hundreds of movies that have been released with inexcusably horrid CGI. And at points it reveals itself to be one of the very many movies that recycle the past in order to save the movie's future. And regardless of how often people complain about that, they continue to do it. And because of these controversies, understand me when I say, talking about this movie isn't going to be easy. But the movie itself isn't all there is to talk about. So, here we go. My name's not important, and this is Abominable Culture. I loved The Flash, and now I know, put down your pitchforks and hear me out. I thought it was an amazing configuration of all the correct choices you can make in such unbearable real-world and fictional circumstances. I thought it was incredible. But in case you don't know, some things large and small have been plaguing it and its audience. People are upset about the production schedule, the James Gunn takeover, Henry Cavill, the poor CGI, the cameos, the fan service, the humor, the overall decorum, and of course, Ezra Miller. He did some pretty bad things. And that truth is one of the reasons why this video is going to be so agonizing to make. Because whereas the conversation is usually on how good the movie is, the conversation now, and may I add a possibly more interesting conversation, is the ethics around supporting projects like this, or the philosophy around separating the art from the artist. Because while one side of the internet is raving about how fantastic this movie is, and another is finding every reason to dislike it, many are on the side of asking themselves if it's okay to patron a movie which will directly support, well, a criminal, which will only perpetuate the advanced leeway we give to celebrities after taking part in less savory things. In this controversy, this divide has not only built up hype for this movie, which in turn may be causing diminishing experiences due to high expectations, which may in fact be the sole reason for the movie's poor reception, but this divide is also propping up this movie's popularity, which will then in turn boost the movie's potential, although abysmal, earnings, which will then support a project people are morally opposed to supporting. But it doesn't look like we'll have to worry about that outcome so much. This movie is a mess, and that's not even mentioning the studio regime changes and the creative infighting that has been rotting the DCEU and Warner Brothers since 2013. But for an unknown reason that feels almost supernatural. For better or worse, The Flash has started to become a cultural moment, and that's before the movie ever even came out. People, for both positive and negative reasons, are going crazy over The Flash. It's being hailed as one of the greatest superhero stories ever told, accused as and accurately performed as the worst DCEU movie to ever hit theaters, yet praised as one of the greatest movies for the theater experience. It's been gossiped, smeared, and ragged on as the largest failure and DCEU letdown. And even with all the hate, and despite the problems the production continued to be burdened with, whether it be by their own doing or not, this movie has represented itself as a prime example of how the writing can make, break, and perhaps even save a whole story or elements of it, regardless of how perfect or damaged the public relations playing field is. But is that all just hype? Is that all just the allure of this movie somehow being amazing even after the controversy and outrageous failure? Is it the allure that even after all of these demerits, they somehow were able to pull off what people were calling a near-perfect movie, while others are protesting its existence? What is it that has seemingly overnight made The Flash appear like such a high cultural event for pop culture and movie-going fans, regardless of its success or failure? Is it all just hype? Or is it somehow that The Flash truly is a masterpiece, or the worst thing to ever be projected onto the silver screen? Well, I had the absolute privilege, much like a ton of people apparently, of seeing The Flash a month early, and spoiler alert, like I said, I loved it. And I'm sure that's already made some of you ready to flag my opinions as underdeveloped brain sludge, but hold on a second. After seeing The Flash, I knew I had to make a video about it, but the thing is, even after a month of refining my thoughts and then seeing it a second time, I still feel like I have nothing to say. Really, that's why this video has been so late to come out, and honestly, maybe that should be the video. Maybe that should be the title. I saw The Flash and I have nothing to say. Sure, that may get a few clicks. It would definitely coincide with the current zeitgeist, but is it honest? Is that really how I feel? Does it mean I was speechless? Was it that good? Or was it so bad that it didn't provoke a thought worthy enough to poetically relay it to you through this video? I don't know. Here, you know what? Let's restart. Okay. My name's not important, and this is Abominable Culture. I loved The Flash. Now, bear with me for this. I thought it was an amazing configuration of all the correct choices you can make in such unbearable, real-world, and fictional circumstances. I thought it was incredible. It was unlike the other DCEU movies in which it felt as though it had a function within the broad DCEU, whereas the other movies did not. So frequently, we'd watch DCEU movies or hear rumors about their production and find that for some reason, the studio seemed to have it out for DC in the sense of how none of the movies or characters ever felt connected. It's like every creative worked in the same building but were forbidden to talk to each other. Even within the DCEU's ensemble movies, it either felt forced or unearned in a similarly weird way as when you were made to hang out with random kids at the park as a child. In a way, these movies felt empty with underdeveloped characters and poor story decisions that we were just expected to accept. But The Flash didn't feel like that. None of its characters did. Michael Keaton was amazing. His return, although bolstered by fan service, still felt earned, and he was one of, if not the greatest part of the movie. Batfleck, despite his small role and behind the deepfake technology, was still able to be the Batman we always wanted but have been continuously robbed of. Sasha Cali? I actually don't know how to say her name. Sasha as Kara Zor-El, Supergirl, was amazing. Aside from her choosing to fight against humanity and boasting about her and Zod killing billions of humans and then changing teams after seeing Zod, well, fight against humanity and kill humans. Aside from that weird thing, I loved her performance and I loved seeing her character in the story. I would love to see her brought back for this role sometime and somewhere in the future of the DCU. And even with all of these characters stuffed into this story, I still felt like it was about Barry Allen. This wasn't a Batman movie. This wasn't a Kryptonian movie. This was a Flash movie. This movie juggled the characters in such a way that it didn't take from Barry's story and it didn't make it feel like empty aesthetics, even though at some times that's all it feels like it's doing. Even with its fan service, even with it clearly trying to earn brownie points by submitting debatably unfit scenes and lines into a story in order to gain nostalgia points, or even worse, a cheap laugh. Even then, The Flash didn't feel empty. Its story and every character in it felt like it made sense on the broader idea of what this pseudo-Flashpoint movie was meant to be. There was no disbelief or cringe I had to fight through in order to accept the images that played out on screen. I was completely and totally present for this movie, regardless of the questionable CGI we were subjected to. And yes, I even mean during that one scene. You know what I'm talking about. And for the most part, that is how we as viewers should be when watching anything. Be present in the moment and absorb. That's not to say that the failures of any movie shouldn't be talked about. But I imagine that much of the hate surrounding The Flash has to do with many who did not give themselves a chance to enjoy the fantastical elements of its story. And although the title Flashpoint was never explicitly mentioned in the marketing, and the similarities between the comic storyline and the movie can be compared and contrasted to no end, I'd say that either way, whether it be true to Flashpoint or not, this movie has done a fantastic job at explaining the parameters of, I'm gonna say it, the multiverse. Especially the multiverse for a Flash movie, and the complexities of how changing the past does not affect the present, but creates a new timeline altogether. Because like in most of my favorite iterations of time travel stories, the course of time is not just a windy spool of neurons connecting different intersections of the ever-running streams of the past, present, and future, but instead, these ripples are exactly that. Ripples within a pool of time which will very soon fade, always reverting back to the way things must be in that specific timeline, entering in the existence, belief, and subordination to fate, and the faith that follows that belief. One of the most subconscious human institutions of the mind is to worship or praise that which is greater than them, and in The Flash, we watch as Barry, despite his efforts and despite his desires, he must accept that he is only a steward of the Speed Force, but does not himself control the parameters of its reach or the rules within where the Speed Force plays. Barry Allen, The fastest man alive is throttled by the very thing that gives him power. The Speed Force plays no favorites. In this movie, The Flash, it's the age-old story of how a man's selfish desires, if not controlled through well-maintained discipline, will ruin what beauty he has left in his life. The Flash is a movie about zealotry, about the willingness to destroy the world in order to obtain your selfish desire. And it's only the greatest of people who can enter onto that path and pull themselves out before it concludes. And one of those people is Barry. Barry, in consequence of his mistakes, earned the knowledge of his limits. You watch the selfish and desperate desires of a man influence his action. And these actions, although he at the beginning was unaware, are irreversible. Even with all of his power, he cannot escape consequence. He cannot escape outcome. He was given the unfortunate chance to test the limits of fate, to stand up to God, the universe, space-time, or whatever it is you'd have me say. He, like most men, like most people, just once in their lives feel like they've earned more than they put in, feel like they can take on the world and that they are capable of paralyzing feats. What Barry did was try to play God, and it didn't work. And without superpowers, without the Speed Force, most people would realize there are limits to their capabilities very soon, that the scope of their dreams is larger than the reality of their influence. But Barry didn't have the luxury of knowing the limits of the average man. Barry had a chance. Barry had hope. Barry could fix it. He can save her, save his mother, change the world, change time to be the omnipotent herald of peace. But that's not how it works. And he learns that more painfully than most, but not before it drives himself and the Barry from another timeline absolutely insane. But he pulls himself out, saving himself twice, and saving the timeline for the most part, and accepting that even for a man at a time, he cannot take for granted a second of it. Not in saving the world, not in solving crime, and not in loving his mother. This movie, as much as people don't want to admit it, behind the CGI and the unforgettable controversies, this movie in its own way was good. It's heartfelt and sincere. Wait a second. Everything I just said, every point I just made, for the most part, is just about The Flash, not just this movie. Whether it be Ezra Miller or not, The Flash is always supposed to be like this. So if those beautiful human elements of their story should be expected anyway, then what did this movie add? And did it relay those messages accurately without taking too much away? Oh, I get it now. It's not that this movie is heartfelt and sincere. It's that is what The Flash is. And people were only able to notice this movie's flaws because at most it only ever met expectations, and at worst took away from those minimal expectations. Well, whether that's how most people see it or not, the message of The Flash being emotionally and dramatically intense was still delivered. And that's what these stories need to be. That's what The Flash is supposed to be, no matter who is playing him. Thank you, Grant Gustin. Things don't always need to be dark and gritty, but the emotions need to be real. The stories need to be honest representations of the human experience through the lives of people burdened with unfathomable power. We need the virtuous Superman, the sacrificing Batman, the fearless Lantern. We need characters that are true to themselves while being real with the audience about the intensity of their situation. We need all of those things without the movie taking away from those characterizations. We need movies to focus more on character and less on spectacle. Because if you have good character, if you have good story, if you have good plot, the spectacle doesn't need to be as prominent as they try to make it in The Flash. As much as I love watching these incredible fight scenes, as much as I love watching Avatar and Iron Man and Spider-Man, the spectacle comes second to story. And I think that's where the disconnect really came for the Flash movie. People felt the disconnect because of the CGI, because of how lazy things look. And if things were a little bit more refined, if things looked a little bit better, I know it sounds so superficial, but if things were a little bit better, people may have been able to see the story for what it really was. These movies need to focus on character before spectacle. That needs to be the future of DC movies, but for good reason, we are fearful that that won't be the path they will go down. We see in The Flash how they were able to communicate the foundation level elements of the character story, but they used the rest of their money and the rest of their creativity, or lack thereof, in order to embellish perhaps the wrong or disadvantageous areas. We are fearful that all the cult classic pop culture titles won't find their way back into that true-to-character form of storytelling once again. And even though the acceptance of one's limitations within the scope of their abilities is the broad take-home theme of The Flash, we were still much more distracted by its failures, to the point where people aren't seeing what's good about the movie at all, and instead only what's bad about it. And I love the message of this film, as I continue to say, pulling yourself away from your selfish desires even if you have the power to act upon them. And it reminds me of one of my most favorite quotes ever by Aristotle. The quote is, "I count him braver who overcomes his desires than him who conquers his enemies. For the hardest victory is over self." In fact, I think I've heard something like that once before. Something about power and responsibility. Yeah, I'm sure I'll remember it later. Look, I love this story, but there was one big flaw in it, which goes to show the state that the superhero genre is in. The whole movie aims to explain to us that we need to live and let live. That our pain is what makes us who we are, and that we need to accept that. That you cannot save people from tragedy. You could only be there for them throughout their healing. That ugliness is what makes life beautiful and worth it, and without it, well, life without consequence is an incomprehensible reality, one of neutered minds and sedated emotions, and that's not living. And even though that seems to be the message of this movie, they still find a way to screw that message up. Even though Barry went through this whole adventure learning not to mess with the timeline, he still chose to change it in order to save his father from incarceration, which then resulted in Barry existing again in a timeline different from his own. Our hero learned nothing. Sure, was it satisfying that such a small change was able to prove his father's innocence? Of course it was. But every lesson Barry learned about the timeline and about how life is only worth living when you remain in some kind of constant struggle went completely out the door when he tried to again cheat reality. Barry learned nothing, and it was all for the sake of setting up sequels and more fan service. This is what so many hate about the crumbling superhero film industry. There's no decorum. This movie, in some cases, has done nothing but confirm people's biggest fears about the superhero industry. That these films will continue to be filled with Marvel-style jokes and George Lucas CGI, and that the writers and directors will continue to always have such grand opportunities that people would kill for to create wonderful, new, and groundbreaking movies, but instead they tend to lean towards the grounded, safe, and gentle storylines for what I imagine is either their fear of failure or their genuine lack of creativity and ambition. And maybe it's the writer's strike that is starting to make us realize how fragile this industry is. Maybe it's the rumored actor strike which is making us realize that people aren't interested in making movies anymore. They have put their passion on the market for cheap, and it was sold instantly. Aside from those who have non-livable wages and those who have been professionally wronged by their superiors, what we are starting to realize is that the passion for movie making is becoming more rare within the professional industry, and greed is starting to take over. The problem, the way I see it, is that studios have no faith in their audiences to be capable of understanding deeper and novel superhero stories. And it's that lack of faith that greenlights dumbed down and simpler stories, which in many cases poorly piggybacks off of old franchises in order to sell nostalgia and familiarity. This lack of faith has given us the most lazy and forgettable stories. And although I truly believe that there was ever a movie to include these types of cameos, the CGI and recycled footage callbacks and deep cuts of Christopher Reeves, Adam West, and of course Nicolas Cage, I believe this would be the movie to do it in. This is one of the only movies in which something like that is even remotely passable. And again, aside from the CGI, I was excited to see them. However, it wasn't perfect. The ethics behind it, the choice to not use John Wesley Shipp or Grant Gustin, the feeling you receive when knowing they are just trying to find ways to make audiences of superfans cheer without deepening the main plot. Because at the end of the day, regardless of how cool it is to see these worlds collide, they add nothing of value to the main character or the deeper story. It's cool, but that's all it is. Just a little cool, and just for a moment. This is what the studios believe the audience wants over everything else, the fan service and the deep cuts. All those things can be great and done very well, but that's the caveat. They need to be done well, but they are losing faith in us being able to handle more complex and emotionally dense stories. They are losing faith in us, but they are also losing it in the characters they write for. The writers and directors are losing touch with these characters. They are afraid to do new things and actually use the characters within the sandbox that is the blank page. In the beginning of the superhero movie genre, we saw how creative the writers and directors got with these new-to-film characters. We saw everything they don't do anymore, all the risks they took, the leaps of faith, and simply scenes in which you know someone somewhere in a writer's room said, wouldn't it be absolutely insane if Spider-Man stopped a runaway train? Wouldn't it be epic if after having his bones fused with indestructible metal, a buck-naked Wolverine takes a bullet straight to the skull, whips his head back, and reveals the shiny new hardware beneath his skin as it heals over during his wild attack? Or how incredible and absolutely hardcore would it be if Iron Man falls from the sky into an active war zone where he kills terrorists with actual bullets that shoot all at once from his shoulder? We miss it. The fighting, the aggression, the power, the themes, the risk-taking, leaps of faith, creativity. There's so much to love about these movies, so much to want from these characters, but these studios have forgotten it all. Even though those were the first movies and many weren't all that great, they still had the best moments for superheroes on the big screen because the sky was the limit. And I'd still say passion is what drove those movies. Passion existed, but it feels like that's not the case anymore, and we know it. As I said before, they are trying to play it safe, and they are losing passion. And much in the way the studios have lost faith in both their characters and their audience, we too have lost faith in the studios. I don't believe superhero fatigue is real. These things aren't becoming derivative. In truth, it's that the creatives have somehow gotten worse at telling stories. People love superheroes. They hate bad stories. Look, I loved The Flash. I had so much fun. I enjoyed the fight scenes. I loved the physical acting each character had while using their powers. I liked the attention to detail when it came to the visual effects, even if those same visual effects weren't very refined. There are tons of things I loved about this movie, but the thing is, I get it. Last month, I was babysitting a 9-year-old boy, and you know what he said to me? He said, DC is stupid and no one likes them. He told me it was embarrassing to like DC. And you know whose fault that is? It's DC's fault. DC ruined their brand by becoming the ever failures of the genre. And with Flash being one of the last movies to another failed DC cinematic universe, I don't have to wonder too hard why no one cares anymore, why no one went out to see this movie. And it's because of that, because of everything I just said, that makes me believe that the future of DC is outrageously bright. James Gunn is now at the helm, and we know how he treats his characters. We know what story and integrity means to him. I truly believe with James Gunn, DC will get exactly what it needs. I have faith that the days of disappointment from DC will soon be behind us. But maybe that's just because I want it to be true. Because I don't really know. No one does. But anything can be better than this. And even after all of that, after everything I said, and although I enjoyed it, I still feel like I have nothing to say about The Flash. Anyway, thank you for coming. I'm glad you made it. And I'll see you on the next one. Man, this was a rough video to make. I was really lost trying to make this, but I hope you enjoyed it. Guys, hey, look, thank you so much for clicking on this video. You guys are the reason we do it. We don't get money. This is for the passion, man. Yeah, no matter how much my co-host Johnny says it, this is for the passion, man. We're doing it for fun. It's awesome. I'm glad you clicked on this video. I'm glad you watched it. Leave a like, comment. Guys, thank you so much. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.